Hey everybody, this is Mr. Mom coming at you with another APUSH video. Today we're taking a look at topic 5.9, government policies during the Civil War. So, in the last topic we were looking at really the military components of the Civil War, strategies, tactics, casualties, things like that. Today we're going to be taking a look at some of the political components of the Civil War and decisions made by Lincoln and the federal government that are going to have a significant impact during this time period. Now, when we do talk about, political leadership during this conflict, obviously you cannot, talk about these things without obviously focusing in on the impact of this man, Abraham Lincoln. Now, Lincoln coming into the presidency had limited political experience. We know he'd been in the House of Representatives. We know he'd been in the Illinois legislature. But, on paper, Lincoln seemingly was not prepared for this kind of a conflict, although arguably nobody would truly be prepared for this kind of a conflict given, the uniqueness of this situation. But thankfully, Lincoln, unlike a lot of his predecessors in the White House, is going to use decisive action, assertive action, to try to create the best policies to save the Union during this cataclysmic period in our history. Now that being said, it is going to also come with some degree of criticism, because as we talk about the impact of Lincoln's leadership during the Civil War, there's certainly some evidence to point to the idea that Lincoln is going to be the most authoritarian president in our nation's history, and that's going to be saying something, compared to somebody like an Andrew Jackson. So when we talk about, Lincoln's use of power, in an unprecedented way, let's take a look at a couple of examples. First off, when we see the war truly now going to become a reality, we're going to be seeing Lincoln dictating spending by the federal government to be able to win the war, including calling up 75,000 soldiers in the summer of 1861. Now, this is significant because when you're talking about raising troops, spending money, that's not a presidential power per the Constitution. That's congressional power per the Constitution. So that is kind of usurping something that, Congress should be doing. Now, the thing is that Congress just kind of stands at the sideline and lets it happen in the name of expediency. Something else that Lincoln's going to be doing that you could argue is, controversial moving forward is that Lincoln is going to suspend habeas corpus. Remember, habeas corpus is a constitutionally protected liberty that we enjoy that protects us from the government just basically scooping us off the street and throwing us in jail for no apparent reason, in terms of no formal charges brought against you. Now, the Constitution does stipulate, though, that habeas corpus can be suspended due to any kind of civil disturbance. Now, Lincoln's going to argue that this is clearly a civil disturbance. We have a civil war that is going on, and Lincoln's going to use that provision of the Constitution to suspend habeas corpus. We're going to be seeing folks that are going to be, for example, north of the Mason-Dixon line and the Ohio River, that might be suspected of disloyalty to the Union, aiding the Confederacy, etc., scooped up and jailed without trial during this conflict. Now, once again, Lincoln's going to justify this by asserting that these are unprecedented times and these are extremely special circumstances, which is true. However, though, it does create a precedent in the future. In other words, any future president could argue that, hey, suspending habeas corpus has been done, Lincoln did it, and once an assertion of power is done by the president, it makes it much easier for future presidents to be willing to engage in that behavior. Now, something that's also very critical to understand in terms of the decisions made by Lincoln during the war is, policies made regarding slavery. We know that the South is going to be seceding from the Union out of an absolute certainty, at least according to their point of view, that Lincoln would abolish slavery. That they absolutely were of the mindset that Lincoln will destroy slavery, therefore destroying their entire way of life. However, Lincoln, through the 1860 election and into the early Civil War, is going to be full-throated in his assertion that No, he is not looking to destroy slavery. Yes, personally he is opposed to it, and yes, he will not allow for the expansion of slavery beyond the states where it already existed, but he did not have any, clear desire to destroy the institution of slavery. Lincoln is noted to have said that, if keeping slavery would keep the Union together, he would do it. Although he also did say if abolishing slavery would keep the Union together, he would also do that. So Lincoln's going to be slow on this idea of abolishing slavery. The first, I would say third of the war, Lincoln really has no desire actively to abolish slavery. And there are some very clear political reasons for that. First off, if you abolish slavery, you have to think about the impact of that on border states such as, Kentucky and Missouri that have stayed in the Union so far. But if now slavery is abolished, that might be seen as violating some of the rights that they enjoy, and that might be kind of that final push to join the Confederacy, and Lincoln doesn't want to see that happen. And speaking of the idea of protecting property, there is a real important question in terms of can Lincoln move with congressional action or via an executive order to abolish slavery? We've seen in the Dred Scott case prior to this that the court has ruled that when you're talking about due process protection, that the government cannot just arbitrarily vote to eliminate slavery because it's part of protected property rights. So Lincoln's going to be concerned about whether or not that's something that can be done. Also, don't forget that just because most Northerners were opposed to the institution of slavery doesn't mean that Northerners were not racist. Racism was endemic in this country. It's not just a Southern thing. This was a national thing. And think about this. If you've got Northerners that are willing to enlist in the Union Army in the name of saving the Union, that's one thing. But if you now shift the focus of the war and say, no, now we're fighting this war to abolish the evil institution of slavery, you're going to see a lot more Northerners go, I don't think so. The idea being is I'll fight to save the Union, but I'm not going to fight to help the rights of Black Americans. That's how endemic the racism was. And remember, Lincoln is a political creature. He realizes that any misstep on this issue of slavery could cost him his reelection campaign in 1864. So he has to tread lightly on this issue, or at least he feels he has to tread lightly on it. Now, that being said, there is a war going on, and Lincoln is going to be very willing to use any strategy, any tactic that is going to aid in ending the war with a Union victory and ending it quickly. And that will include the passage of these things called the Confiscation Acts. What this does is it allows the Union Army to be able to confiscate property of those individuals that were aiding or are part of the rebel cause. And that includes things such as homes, farms, but it also includes slaves. And so what's going to be happening is that if a slave is now under the, for lack of a better term, protection of the Union Army, that slave is now going to be emancipated because now that slave is considered the property of the federal government, and the federal government under Lincoln is going to free those slaves. So that's going to be significant because as property is lost, and however you want to define property, as that property is lost, that's only going to hasten the end of the war because therefore the South has fewer resources to be able to help them in their fight. But note, we've said before that Lincoln's view on slavery will evolve. One of the great things about Lincoln is that he is a reflective person. Lincoln is a person that is highly intelligent and is cognizant and mindful of what am I supposed to be doing? What is this about? What is the end goal? What should we really be striving to achieve? And as the war drags on, Lincoln's realizing that what we have so far in our history, a nation divided on slavery, has brought us to this point. It's brought us to a point we are now seeing hundreds of thousands of young men die over this issue because we cannot come together on it. If the end goal of this war is to simply keep the Union together, and the recombining of the Union is a return to a divided nation on slavery, free to the North and enslaved to the South, Lincoln eventually comes to the realization that all that would do is put a Band-Aid on the situation, and these tensions would boil over again, and it would just lead to another war over this same issue. So by the time we get to the fall of 1862, Lincoln realizes that if you truly want to end this war, if you truly want to prevent future people from dying in a conflict like this, you have to change what the goal of this war is about. And it's not going to be simply to reunite the Union anymore. It is to end slavery. It has to be. You have to eliminate slavery completely, otherwise you will have this fight again in the future. And this is going to lead him to drafting the Emancipation Proclamation. On January 1st, 1863, Lincoln will announce that any slaves in rebelling territories of the United States are now hereby freed. Now note, there's a lot of significance to this, because first off, this is only, per the document, applying to slaves in rebelling states. So if you're talking about slaves in, say, Kentucky, a border state in the Union, doesn't apply. Also note that simply because Lincoln makes an assertion, makes an announcement, an executive order, if you will, that slaves in rebelling territories are free, that doesn't mean that, Southerners in these rebelling states are just going to liberate their slaves. So, the Union Army's still going to have to actually, by force, liberate these slaves. But most importantly, what this document now asserts clearly, there is no question now. There's no, there's nothing, vague about this. This war is now about ending slavery. It's now a moral fight. It's not simply a pragmatic fight to keep the Union together, but there is a moral component to it. This is now a war to abolish the evil institution of slavery. And also note, with the emancipation of African Americans, this is also going to allow for African Americans to be able to serve in the Union Army. And once that opportunity is now presented, you will see hundreds of thousands of black Americans, come to the call. Take a look at this. Over 200,000 black Americans, most recently emancipated, are going to serve with distinction in the U.S. military. And think about it. If you are black and you are serving in the Union Army, there's certainly a special component to why you're fighting compared to other Union soldiers. This is for liberty. This is really for freedom. And some of you might be familiar with the exploits of the Massachusetts 54th Regiment, which was a black regiment. If you've ever seen the movie Glory, it talks about the exploits of this group of African American Union soldiers, particularly their impact in the state of South Carolina. So anyhow, we're going to leave it there for this video. We'll have a couple more videos taking a look at some other important political decisions regarding the Civil War, and then ultimately the end of the war and the tragic end of the Lincoln presidency. We'll see you next time.